Hi there, welcome to this little series of videos. And now what I'm planning to do in this series is just to walk through every chapter of biblical critical theory, and not really just to summarise it, but to draw out things that have been helpful for me, I guess, along the way, things that I've learned, things that I found insightful when I came across them. And these videos aren't scripted, so I don't quite know what I'm going to say, but I hope that whatever I do end up saying, it might be useful to you as you engage with the book as well. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the introduction. And the trickiness with an introduction to a Christian book on culture is how to think about culture. I remember coming across this wonderful quote from T.S. Eliot. I think it was from the 1940s, where he said, "Nobody defines culture these days." And I read it thinking, I wish we still lived in that age. Everybody who writes a Christian book that goes anywhere near the world view these days has to define culture. So the problem that I encountered was that everybody tends to choose one aspect of culture and make it the controlling factor for all of culture. So for the longest time in the Christian tradition, we had this idea of worldview, didn't we? Which we took to mean that ideas drive everything. If you want to really understand a culture, you've got to understand how it thinks about creation and fall and so forth. And of course, there's a very deep and helpful truth in that. But culture is not just about ideas. And so there was a pushback against that idea. And it said, no, we've got to include cultural artifacts. We've got to look at the way a culture organizes itself. We've got to look at the habits and patterns of behavior that define a culture. That's really what a culture is about. And the more I reflected on it, the more I thought that neither of those really is good enough as the overall idea of what a culture is. And you need some way of trying to articulate those together, because ideas are really, really important. And behaviors and, what Charles Taylor calls the social imaginary, the assumptions that we hold about the world, are really, really important as well. And so what I settled on in the end is the idea of figures. And it's a very, in a sense, a very loose term. It's anything that rhythms or patterns our sense of existence. So meaning can be understood as rhythm, for example, in the sense that both monotone and white noise are meaningless. Complete chaos and complete order are meaningless. You've got to have some sort of rhythm of the two in order for there to be meaning. And if you think about the idea of figures of speech and metaphor, for example, it's a way of patterning and rhythm in speech that can be filled with almost any content. And this idea of figure became really useful as a way of being able to read over between, on the one hand, concepts and ideas, which are figures, which do pattern and rhythm, meaning and reality, but also things like behaviors, which similarly give a pattern and a meaning and a rhythm to life. And for the book, I came up with 6 categories of these figures. I'm not suggesting that this list is definitive, and there's certainly overlap between the categories, but it just helps us to get a grip on what a culture is in a broader way than saying it's fundamentally habits translated into ideas, or it's fundamentally ideas translated into habits. And I've just got it up on the screen in front of me here. These 6 categories that I had were, first of all, time and space. So the way that we rhythm time and space. So, for example, a week has 7 days, and there's a circularity to that. We've got 4 seasons, but also the modern world believes that time is simply one line. There's nothing that Charles Taylor calls higher time. It's just one day after another after another. There's no texture. There's no qualitative difference in time. That would be a way of rhythming time. And space, of course, the main one is there just one space in which everything exists? Or are there multiple spaces? Metaphysics would be one of the main philosophical ways of articulating that difference. And the way we pattern and rhythm space and time has huge implications for the way we understand culture. We've got languages, ideas, and stories. Stories rhythm our existence, don't they? They pattern our sense of the world and our own lives. Ricoeur has got this idea of narrative identity that really tries to bring that out. Objects rhythm us as well. Here I am sitting on a chair in front of a desk with my trusty cup of coffee. All these things are shaping the way that I interact with the world and shaping my sense of the world as well. There's the building I'm living in, huge objects, the internet, rhythms my existence, and so forth. Behavior, the habits that I go through every morning, the habits that define the different stages of my life, my behavior with other people, the way that I relate to other people behaviorally, are figures as well. And then, of course, relationships, my relationship with the government and the state, my relationship with my wife, what is deemed appropriate and expected in certain relationships with colleagues, with students in my case. And all these relationships also figure life and give meaning to life. And then the last one I've called the structure of reality, which is essentially the sense that is reality all encompassed in what we apprehend with our senses? Is that it, what I see? Or, as the Bible would say, is there something that we might call the kingdom of heaven, which is different to the reality that we directly perceive with our eyes, but that can fold itself into it and that can become manifest in it and so forth. So these are the 6 different types of figure, and it's my attempt to try and give a balanced appraisal of all the different factors that feed off each other in going into the way that we make meaning and the way that we inhabit our world by patterning it and rhythming it. And when you take all these 6 categories together, what they form, I think, is what I've called in the book a world. And that's just a shorthand way of saying what happens when all these different 6 types of figures, fire off each other and work together. What you end up with is a world. So that's the idea of culture that I run with in the book, and it just helps us not to overprivilege ideas, not to overprivilege behaviors, but to try and take account of all the different things that are going on in this complex thing that we call culture.